Hi, I'm Ellie of Faye and Ellie's Book Nook, and today I'm going to be doing my October wrap-up video. I'm going to be going through all of the books that I read in October, what I liked, what I didn't like. I read 4 in total, plus 3 volumes of comic books or graphic novels. So let's get stuck right in. The first book that I read was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. It took me about 5 days to read in total. I finished it on the train up to London when I was going to see some friends, including the lovely Faye. I really liked the book. In comparison to The Fault in Our Stars, I'd probably say that I liked The Fault in Our Stars better, but this book was just really profound for me at the moment. The reason that it was so profound is that the character suffers from anxiety related specifically to her health, and I've recently been going through quite an anxious period in my life and sort of having to deal with what I now realise are triggers for anxiety and sort of learning how to combat that in a way that doesn't make me more anxious. So reading this book, I was kind of reading her symptoms of anxiety and going, oh my god, that's exactly what I go through. In fact, I had to put down the book a couple of times because the similarities were making me anxious, and so I had to sort of walk away for a couple of seconds. The plot was really interesting. The characterization was really good. What I love about John Green's books is that he treats his teenage characters like young adults. He doesn't treat them like children, and he allows them to have profound thoughts and valid opinions about the world. He doesn't sort of belittle them, and I always liked that about his books. He doesn't let teenagers be less than because they're teenagers. And the only major criticism I have of the book is there are no turtles in it. There is a reptile, but there is no turtles. I'm suing John Green is all I'm saying. I was told there was going to be turtles. I was looking forward to the turtles. Overall, I give the book an 8 out of 10. I would definitely read it again. I definitely say it's my second favourite of all of the books that I've read by John, and actually made me want to read a bit more of his because I haven't finished all of his books. And I appreciate how hard it was to write this book and to publish it, because after you've had such a success as The Fault in Our Stars, it can be hard to live up to the hype of the next book. And I think this book does that. It lives up to the hype. It's as good as The Fault in Our Stars, probably not better, but it's still really moving, really well written, very thoughtful, and deals with some real problems that teenagers go through. And I thought that was a really important thing to be talking about these days. Mental health is really important, and it's not discussed enough in young adult literature, so I thought that was a good addition to my October read. As I mentioned, I finished Turtles All the Way Down on the way up to London, and then I faced a 2-hour train journey home with 10% battery on my phone and no book to read. So I went into W.H. Smith's at the train station and I brought S.T.A.G.S. I started reading this at 6 o'clock that evening and I finished it by 10 o'clock. This was such an engrossing book. It was I couldn't. What was really cool about reading this book was on a train is that we had like a really bad set of fog, and all of the windows were like foggy and sort of dark and mysterious, and it really added to the sort of drama of what I was reading. S.T.A.G.S is about a working class girl who goes to a very old and very sort of prestigious English boarding school called S.T.A.G.S the Great, that's the one. And she gets invited with 2 other students to go to this weekend long trip at one of the popular kids' fancy estate house, and all is not as it seems. So what was really cool is that this was written and took place in England, and that was really cool because I'm from England, so reading a book about English society and English class system and racism within English society was really refreshing for me, because I find there's not enough of England in young adult literature. We need to change that, because the systems here and the systems of racism and classism here are just as interesting as anywhere else in the world. In fact, I'd say more interesting. And this book managed just to have a very suspenseful and very thoughtful look at the view from all sides, from the upper classes to the middle class to the working class, but also manages to be sort of tense. But I wouldn't say that it was scary. I don't actually know where to put this genre-wise. I would say that it was a thriller, but I'd also say it was a bit spooky. It's just I would just pick it up, and the ending is just so great. I really just want to tweet at the author, like, are you releasing a sequel? Is there going to be a sequel? Because what I find really good about this book, and what all books should probably go for, is that if I read this book and they released a sequel and I never picked it up, I would still be perfectly satisfied with this story. But if I did pick up the sequel, there was more story to tell. It wouldn't feel like it was unnecessary. They set up a lovely avenue for a sequel without making it completely necessary for you to enjoy this book. Overall, I would give this probably 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. It was not as good as Tales All the Way Down. It probably fails on the writing a little bit more, but it made up for it with a really good plot, very witty dialogue. I then read The Prisoner of the Inquisition. This was featured in my unhaul video. I did read this. It's very short, and I have to say that I did not enjoy this as much as I hoped that I would. It did star first in my unhaul video. The basic premise is that a girl called Zarita is going to chapel. This takes place around about the Spanish Inquisition, as you can probably tell, and a beggar comes up to her and asks for money. She cries out, and he is then sentenced to death by hanging. His young son is almost killed, but instead he is sent off as a slave. And the story follows the young boy and Zarita, who the young boy's called name is Saulo. I think that's how it's said. And what I felt like was going on with this book is it was doing too much build up, because Saulo swears revenge against Zarita and her family, but you don't really get a lot of the satisfaction that you'd want from the storyline. And eventually the two cross paths again, and it's sort of very interesting. What I didn't like about this book is that Christopher Columbus is a essential character in the plot. When he sort of turned up, I was like, oh god, no, what is going on here? And Saulo learns a lot from Christopher Columbus, and I'm just like, oh yay, Christopher Columbus praise. I didn't like that bit of the book. I thought it was a bit unnecessary. They could have like put any fictional character in that place and I wouldn't have cared, but it was Christopher Columbus and I was like, but why? And the ending was a bit weak in my opinion. It probably won't get a sequel. It's probably one of those sort of you'll never know endings, but I wouldn't have any sort of desire to read a sequel if there was one. So overall about 4, 5 out of 10. And finally, the last book I read in October was Three Dark Crowns. Right, I have a lot of feelings about this book. I picked this book up a little earlier in the year and I've only just got around to reading it. So most people will know what this book is around because it's quite popular at the moment. It's about 3 princesses, queens, who live on an island, and they have been separated since the age of 7 because they will eventually have to murder each other in order to get the crown. Each of them has 3 powers. There's a poisoner called Catherine, a naturalist called Arsinoa. I'm gonna go with Arsinoa. And then there's the elemental called Mirabella. This book follows all 3 sisters, and what I thought was really clever is that I didn't have a favourite sister. Like, I thought the book was going to be trying to get me to be like, you want to like support this one, but you want these 2 to die horribly via poisoning or electrocution or whatnot. But it didn't do that. It portrayed all of the 3 of the sisters as quite decent people who were living in horrific circumstances. And what I found really interesting about the book is that not a lot of people are happy about this system, but no one seems to be doing anything to stop it. This is particularly interesting in the case of the naturalist Arsinoa, whose foster family have kind of come to the conclusion that she's gonna die, but they don't want to mention it around her because, you know, no one wants to tell someone that. And they're all kind of pretending that she's not going to die, but they all feel like she's going to die. And I thought this needed a bit more work. I was just like, we should be narrowing in on this feeling of just like resignation to the fact that she's probably going to die. And this happens a bit with Catherine but she's a bit more entitled. Her family are a bit more sort of determined to make her the winner by any means necessary. I liked the politicking going on in the background with people who had something to gain from this system, But I was kind of hoping that all the princesses would get in together at the end of it and just install a symbol of a system of democracy, but that didn't happen. I felt that this book was really slow for the most part. I was just like, okay, yeah, yeah, when are they going to get to the bit where they have to murder each other, is what I was thinking. I was like, surely that's what they're building up to, and we were getting to the last 50 pages, and I was like, oh, okay, we're not going to be doing that in this book. Obviously there's a sequel. I knew that there was a sequel. But then the last 50 or so pages just go at lightning speed. So many things happen. There's about a million conversations where they go completely the opposite direction that I thought it was going to go. There's a particular one involving Catherine where I was like, oh, okay, that did not go the way I was thinking, and I loved it. I loved that it just sort of completely sort of flipped my expectations, and it made me really want to read the next one, which I will be picking up immediately. And then I also really loved the ending, the absolute last page. I sort of stared at the page for about a minute and a half, just like, I'm sorry, what? It gripped me into reading the sequel, but if the next one is as slow as this one, I'm probably not going to enjoy it. I want the next one to be more fast-paced, more action, more things going on, more than not just waiting for the inevitable, which was going on in this. I now know that there's going to be 4 books in this series, and I'm a little concerned about that because I don't know how much of this plot could be sustained over 4 books, so I'm expecting one of those books to be almost completely filler. And I read the first chapter of the next book that's in the back of this book, and I was like, okay, now I need to read that book because there was an awesome part in that one, and I'm just like, give it to me now. So I will definitely be reading that one soon. So that is my October wrap up, 4 books in total, and I have officially finished my reading challenge for the year, which is to read 85 books. I am Ellie of Ellie's Book Nook. Bye.